21. Ravenclaw's diadem. Ciaran understood that Dumbledore wasn't personally to blame for the widening rift between the houses. In the original timeline, at the end of his life, Dumbledore had counseled Malfoy to choose better, to try and steer him away from complete corruption. But the present circumstances were different. Many of the parents of Slytherin's students openly supported pure-blood supremacy. Some had once been Death Eaters, and after Voldemort's fall, had used every means to avoid imprisonment. At home, they taught their children to look down on Muggles and to prize blood purity above all else. Those lessons take root young. On the other side, the parents of Gryffindor students had been the first to stand against Voldemort and had paid dearly. Neville's parents had been tortured into madness. Mrs. Weasley had lost 2 brothers to the Death Eaters. There were countless such stories. Naturally, those parents raised their children to resist dark wizards. The different educations produced different attitudes in the next generation. In the original timeline, the side opposing Voldemort had decisively won the Second Wizarding War. Death Eaters who had not escaped or atoned for their crimes had been imprisoned in Azkaban. That uniform outcome made the next generation more united. Harry and Ginny's youngest son could be friends with Malfoy's son. Malfoy's son might even court Ron and Hermione's eldest daughter with a chance of success. Who could have imagined that in the older timeline? The magical world's divisions were largely born of the older generation's battles. If the next generation returned, in effect, to one camp, relationships between pure-blood, half-blood, and Muggle-born wizards would improve, and the students' relationships would improve even more. It was the kind of world Dumbledore had always hoped to see. "You're right, Ciaran," Dumbledore sighed. As headmaster, he could not be ignorant of what was happening at Hogwarts. He had tried to guide things, but a headmaster was not a parent. His influence had limits. Only when the circumstances outside the school change will things inside change, Ciaran replied. Dumbledore listened, then smiled faintly. "But where there's a will, there's a way, isn't there, Ciaran?" Ciaran nodded. He had no family. His parents had died in the First Wizarding War, and he had yet to find a wife or settle down. His responsibility here was simple: to be a good professor and do what he could for the students. They talked for most of the day until the sun began to set and amber light filled the headmaster's office. When Ciaran left, Dumbledore watched his retreating back with thoughts racing and a quiet hope for a future where students from all houses lived in harmony. After he left the office, Ciaran circled back to the 8th floor corridor. It was deserted, no students or teachers in sight. He paced the stretch of blank wall 3 times, and then, as if answering him, a smooth door appeared. He pulled the copper handle and stepped inside. Where did I get to yesterday?" he muttered, picking up from where his previous search had left off. He searched patiently, touching countless items, magical artifacts and mundane things alike, but none contained force points. He did, however, collect a few practical magical objects that might prove useful someday. In wizarding combat, the first advantage is usually whether you have a wand in your hand. Aside from a few extraordinarily powerful wizards, most without wands are nearly helpless. Internal magical aptitude, spell proficiency, timing, and combat experience all change outcomes as well. Magical items and potions can be decisive. Take Felix Felicis, for example. That potion grants enhanced luck for 12 hours. A wizard who drinks it will find spells aimed at them mysteriously missing or circumstances bending in their favor. In the original timeline, a small group of adults and underage wizards held off a larger force of Death Eaters, in part because some had taken Felix Felicis, skewing fortune just enough to prevent major casualties. Dumbledore's death at that time was not part of this calculation. Ciaran thought that in his spare time, he might try making useful magical items himself, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He tossed a long, empty potion bottle in his hand and sighed. Then his breath caught. Before him stood a dilapidated cabinet, bubbles of age pocking its surface. On top sat a cracked bust of a man, a dusty old wig draped over it, and an ancient, faded crown-like object. Ravenclaw's diadem. He felt a surge of excitement he could scarcely hide. There was no one else in the room. He stepped forward and reached out, fingers closing around the cool metal. "Ravenclaw's diadem, force points 35. Do you choose to absorb?" A message flashed across his system panel. Ciaran grinned. Finally, something with force points he could absorb. For a moment, though, puzzlement crept in. The sorting hat had shown as much as 150 force points. How could Ravenclaw's diadem be only 35? Then he remembered. The sorting hat had been at Hogwarts for over 1,000 years, sorting generations of students. It was practically a part of the school itself, with immense influence and historical significance. Its high number made sense. The diadem, by contrast, was largely symbolic. Its influence on the broader wizarding world was far smaller. If it had any force points at all, 35 was plausible. Besides, the system might be accounting for the fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul that had been hidden in it. Without that dark residue, it might have been worth even less. Ciaran pushed the other thoughts away. His immediate priority was to siphon the force points from Ravenclaw's diadem. He had planned to leave the room of requirement and absorb them back in his office, but then he remembered the diadem contained a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul, and this was his first time absorbing force points. What if something abnormal happened during the process? He couldn't risk exposing his secret. He certainly didn't want anyone thinking he was a dark wizard here to save Voldemort. Better to stay in the room of requirement. It was unlikely to be discovered, and if something went wrong, the room could isolate it, he told himself. He curled his fingers around the cold metal of the diadem and focused. A thin line of text appeared before his eyes. Ravenclaw's diadem. Force points. 35 points. Do you choose to absorb? He took a breath and said, absorb. A cool, refreshing sensation seeped out from the diadem like a summer breeze. On his system panel, the force points counter flickered upward from 0, 18, 19, 20. Ciaran felt a small thrill, but he kept his mind on what the diadem held, a piece of Voldemort's soul. Would it react? At first, the diadem seemed inert. Then, after he'd taken in 22 force points, it trembled violently in his hand, as if trying to wrench itself free. A hazy, dreamlike vision flooded his mind, himself seated on the Hogwarts headmaster's throne, a sea of wizards kneeling and adoring him, worship written on every face. He was the most powerful wizard in the magical world. Dumbledore, no match for him. He felt a joy that rose from his core. He was strong, ruling over wizards and resources, the sole god of magic. For a moment he let the image wash over him, and then he shook his head and sighed. This isn't what I want, he said aloud. Lord Voldemort, your way of tempting a wizard's desires is no match for the sorting hat. At least the hat can truly read a young wizard's heart. You can't. He had come from another China in the 21st century by accident, ending up in Harry Potter's world. Was he here to be a ruler or a dictator? No, that wasn't his aim. Strength mattered, but only as a way to control his own fate. He had a system panel. He only needed to find magical items that held force points. He could grow stronger step by step, possibly even matching or surpassing Dumbledore or Voldemort, without taking guidance from a corrupted soul. Many who trusted Voldemort later regretted it. Once you joined him, you couldn't simply resign. Regulus Black was proof. He joined the Death Eaters, realized Voldemort's true face, and died to steal a Horcrux back. That Horcrux, Slytherin's locket, would also contain force points. Ciaran made a mental note. He'd have opportunities to get it later. The absorption finished. The diadem had dulled. From it came a faint, distant keening. The object wasn't destroyed. Its magic was only weakened, and the soul fragment within had been seriously damaged. Ciaran reflected that taking force points naturally did some harm to the vessel, but this was acceptable. He was also glad he hadn't given in to the temptation earlier in the year. If he'd damaged something like the sorting hat, then Dumbledore would have noticed, and he didn't need that kind of attention. Age, 26 years old. Magic power, level 4, elementary. Force points figuration, level 3. Potion, level 3. Charms, level 4, intermediate. Herbology, level 3. Flying, level 3. The numbers on the panel made his pulse quicken. He focused on the magic power section and began spending force points. A warm, tingling current surged through him as his internal magic swelled. The force points counter plunged, 25, then lower. 10 force points raised his magic power from level 4, elementary, to level 4, intermediate. Another 20 points later, and he'd pushed it again to level 4, advanced. When the upgrade completed, only 5 force points remained. He tasted both triumph and caution. Raising magic power was expensive, and the sudden jump had left him physically strained. Doubling his power in such a short span had put a real burden on his body. Even if he had more points, he wouldn't pump them into magic power right away. He needed time to adapt to this new level, or he might harm himself. He stroked his chin and considered other options. Knowledge-based skills like charms or transfiguration should be safer to upgrade. They wouldn't stress his body the way raw power did. He only had 5 points left, enough, he hoped, to make some useful improvement. He clicked charms, but the system panel didn't respond. 5 points wouldn't cover the cost to raise charms from level 4, intermediate, to level 4, advanced. The interface stayed stubbornly inactive. Ciaran let out a soft, rueful laugh and settled back against the cushions of the room of requirement. For now, he had made progress, more than he'd expected, and kept himself out of sight. The diadem was weakened, Voldemort's fragment damaged, and he had a plan: find more Horcruxes, collect force points, and grow stronger on his own terms. He only needed patience and caution. 5 force points weren't enough to upgrade charms, so Ciaran settled for the next best thing. He focused on the transfiguration column and watched it jump from level 3 to level 4, elementary, then stop at level 4, intermediate. His force points drained to 0 in less than 2 minutes, but the change in him was immediate. He felt he could take on 2 of his former selves. Of all the sections on the system panel, increasing his magic level was the priority. Magic was the foundation of a wizard. After that came charms, transfiguration, potions, herbology, flying, and so on. He already had a natural talent for charms and enjoyed the sensation of his spellcasting improving. There was a direct link between that and his combat power. Transfiguration was weaker for him, but he wanted to master it for a deeper reason: the animagus transformation. Becoming an animagus required profound transfiguration skill. Only a handful of wizards in the magical world ever achieved it. Even if you included unregistered animagi, the number remained tiny. For prodigies in transfiguration, like James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, who were responsible for the Marauders map, the requirement might be lower. They had already been animagi as students. That only proved they had exceptional talent, not that they were inherently more powerful than most experienced wizards. He glanced at his system panel. Name, Ciaran. Age, 26. Magic power, level 4 advanced. Force points 0. Transfiguration, level 4 intermediate. Potions, level 3. Charms, level 4 intermediate. Herbology, level 3. Flying, level 3. The force points had reset to 0. His magic power was now advanced, and transfiguration read intermediate. He guessed that he might need transfiguration at level 6, or at least level 5, advanced, to become an animagus, unless he proved to be unusually gifted. Holding the Ravenclaw diadem made him uneasy. It was one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes, containing a splinter of the Dark Lord's soul. Though he had drained all the force points from it, and thereby wounded that fragment, the soul piece would only hide and slowly recover unless the diadem itself were destroyed. He had no desire to carry a powerful, malevolent dark arts object around. But discarding it carelessly could endanger everyone at Hogwarts. After thinking it over, he hid the diadem under a cabinet in the Room of Requirement. Very few people knew where the Room of Requirement manifested, and it changed form constantly. Even a curious student rummaging through its many furnishings would be unlikely to find one small object tucked away among countless relics. Voldemort had placed that Horcrux there when he had a reason to hide it. Decades had passed without anyone discovering it, which was exactly what he had wanted. If the Chamber of Secrets opens again this year, I'll just destroy this thing, Ciaran muttered. At least I already drained the force points. He left the Room of Requirement and returned to his office on the 4th floor. After a quick dinner, he sat and tested the surge of magic inside him and the new transfiguration knowledge now at his disposal. An owl knocked on the window and fluttered in, hooting twice. "Edwina, you're back," he said. He fed his owl and removed an envelope from the messenger strap. Edwina tucked into her meal, then perched contentedly until she had finished. Ciaran opened the letter. It was from the Burrow. Mr. Weasley had written back about Ron's wand. They would buy Ron a new wand as soon as possible and send it to Hogwarts. The letter thanked Ciaran repeatedly for his concern. Ron's marks shouldn't be so bad this year, Ciaran said with a small smile. After settling Edwina back into the window so she could return to the owlery and have her freedom, he washed up and went to bed. The weekend after acquiring the diadem and spending force points had been quiet. Since then, nothing dramatic had happened. He continued his daily teaching duties and, with older students, finally began supervised dueling. On more than one occasion, he took a class outdoors. Sometimes a large, open space was better for combat practice than a cramped classroom. The students liked him, especially in comparison to Gilderoy Lockhart, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Lockhart's reputation had clung to him for a while, but his true level became obvious, more like a seventh-year student than a real professor. Aside from the first week, Lockhart never taught practical defense properly. He spent lessons retelling the adventures from his books, using them as pop quiz material. A practical, hands-on subject had become little more than a storytelling hour. Many of the other teachers were displeased but kept their complaints quiet. Their faces betrayed them enough. Ciaran, on the other hand, earned a good reputation among the staff. He had real skill and temperament. He wasn't petty or self-important. What he cared about, above all, were magical objects that contained force points, and those were rare. So far, he had truly examined only two, the Sorting Hat and the Ravenclaw diadem. Other Horcruxes that might hold force points were a different matter. Slytherin's locket was believed to be hidden at the Black family house. He couldn't get in there now. Hufflepuff's golden cup was likely in Gringotts, and likewise out of reach. Riddle's diary and Nagini, and anything connected to Harry Potter himself, probably didn't contain force points. That left Marvolo Gaunt's ring as the only one he hadn't accounted for, but he didn't know its exact location. He had asked Professor Binns, the history of magic teacher, about the Gaunt family and any clues as to where the ring might be. Professor Binns was dry and dusty, but had the long memory of someone who taught history for decades. Even if answers were slow in coming, they were often accurate. "You mean the Gaunt old house, Professor Frémont?" Professor Binns replied in his usual deadpan tone. He was a ghost. Legend had it he fell asleep in front of a fireplace one night and simply forgot to bring his body with him the next morning, and so he had floated on as the professor of the history of magic at Hogwarts for centuries. He had witnessed and chronicled the school's history for ages. "Yes, Professor Binns," Ciaran nodded. "Why are you suddenly interested in these things, Professor Frémont? I thought you taught combat." Binns's monotone didn't change. Ciaran offered the explanation he'd already prepared. "I was reading about changes in magic and learned the Gaunt family was supposedly the only remaining descendant line of Salazar Slytherin. The book says the Gaunt bloodline was severed." Ciaran had planned his excuse carefully. If Binns asked why he was probing, he'd be ready. As for the claim the bloodline was severed, Ciaran privately thought that couldn't be taken at face value. As long as Lord Voldemort existed, there would be a living trace of the Gaunt line, though Voldemort's claim to Gaunt blood was complicated. "Yes, that's right," Binns said. "The Gaunt family is the last known line of Salazar Slytherin. Salazar himself opposed Muggle-born witches and wizards attending Hogwarts, though he didn't discriminate against Muggles as a people." He paused in his flat narration. He eventually left Hogwarts after quarreling with the other founders. The others insisted on treating purebloods, half-bloods, and Muggle-borns equally, and that disagreement is what split them. "All right, let us continue with the Gaunts," Binns went on. "As you said, Professor Frémont, the Gaunt bloodline was considered severed. The last of the Gaunt family was Morphin Gaunt. He was imprisoned after murdering Muggles and died in Azkaban. Morphin never married, so officially the line ended there." Ciaran thought, officially ended, yet Lord Voldemort was the son of Merope Gaunt and the Muggle Tom Riddle. Morphin Gaunt would never have recognized Tom Riddle's son as a rightful Gaunt heir, and Voldemort's physical body had long since been destroyed. He only survived through Horcruxes after the incident at Godric's Hollow, and he would not be a full, restored life unless he completed the resurrection ritual as in the original events. In that ritual, the catalysts were Harry Potter's blood, Peter Pettigrew's flesh, and the bone of his father, Tom Riddle Sr. Nothing from his mother's family was used. So if one took that route of reasoning, the resurrected Voldemort would no longer have gaunt blood flowing through him. In that sense, the Gaunt line might truly be seen as severed. The gaunt old house is on the outskirts of Little Hangleton, Binns continued. That place should have been abandoned long ago, Professor Frémont. If you intend to visit the gaunt old house, that would not be wise. Ciaran nodded and left Binns's dusty office. On his way out, he kept thinking about Marvolo Gaunt, Voldemort's maternal grandfather. Then a crucial memory clicked into place. In the original timeline, when Dumbledore learned about Tom Riddle's diary, he deduced Voldemort must have made a Horcrux and began searching for other artifacts. He discovered Marvolo Gaunt's ring in the gaunt old house, but there was more to that ring than a Horcrux. The ring had contained the Resurrection Stone. Ciaran felt his heart race. He knew the Resurrection Stone was one of the Deathly Hallows, a trio of legendary objects far older and, in many ways, more mysterious than ordinary relics. Voldemort had not been interested in the stone, and he had not found it. If the Deathly Hallows existed in this world, they would surely carry enormous force points. The Hallows, especially the Elder Wand, featured in countless pivotal events in the magical world. Ciaran recalled the story from the Tales of Beetle the Bard. 3 brothers traveling together came to a deep, treacherous river. They managed to conjure a bridge and crossed, only to meet Death in the middle. Death, sly and angry at being cheated, offered each a reward. The eldest asked for a wand that would always win, a most powerful wand, later called the Elder Wand. The second, proud and desirous of defying death, asked for a stone that could recall the dead. He received the Resurrection Stone. The third, the wisest, asked for something that would hide him from death entirely and was given an invisibility cloak. They went their separate ways. The eldest, with the unbeatable wand, won battles but drew deadly envy and was murdered in his sleep. The second used the Resurrection Stone to summon back a lost love, but the woman was hollow and distant between life and death. In despair, he took his own life to join her. Both were taken by death in the end. The third brother, who had been cautious all his life, wore the invisibility cloak and evaded death until he grew old. Then he removed the cloak and greeted death as an equal. The 3 objects, Elder Wand, Resurrection Stone, and Invisibility Cloak, are called the Deathly Hallows. Ciaran's mind whirred with possibilities. If the Founder's relics contained force points, the Deathly Hallows would likely hold even more. The Elder Wand alone had woven itself through so many great events that its power would be immense. He could not help feeling a rush of excitement at the thought. Marvolo Gaunt's ring, the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows. Ciaran was in high spirits. He had discovered a place that was almost certain to hold a large number of force points, the gaunt old house. If he could get the ring and the Philosopher's Stone, he'd probably be able to reach level 5 wizard, he thought. He wasn't planning to go there right away. He'd wait until after the holidays. He'd never been to Little Hangleton and couldn't apparate there. He wasn't skilled enough with portkeys, and the flu network to that abandoned house was surely disconnected. Riding a broom that far was out of the question. He'd sooner take a car into London. He had the whole summer to plan. Outside the Great Hall, he ran into Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who were leaving with a determined air. "Where are you off to?" he asked. Harry and Ron looked a little glum. Hermione answered for them. "Professor, we accepted Nearly Headless Nick's invitation. We're going to his death day party." Nearly Headless Nick was one of Gryffindor's ghosts. The 2 boys exchanged wry looks. The bustling great hall down the corridor was all carved pumpkins and fairy lights, Hagrid's giant pumpkin lanterns dimly glowing, and they had heard Dumbledore had even arranged a skeleton dance troupe. The thought made them regret accepting the invitation even more. Ciaran smiled as realization dawned. Today was Halloween Eve. He remembered how, in the original sequence of events, Madame Norris had been petrified by the basilisk. He wondered whether the same thing would happen this time. During his stay at the Burrow over the summer, he had dropped hints about dangerous magical objects to Ginny, hoping she would take them seriously instead of laughing them off. Now he was curious to see how the plot would unfold. "Professor, have you ever been to a ghost party?" Harry's eyes brightened, and he looked at Ciaran expectantly. Is it really as wonderful as it sounds? Better than the Halloween feast? Ron and Harry leaned toward him, desperate for a clear answer. Hermione, though embarrassed by their eagerness, admitted she was curious as well. She'd never seen a ghost celebration. Ciaran winked at them. A ghost party is a very peculiar experience, he said. Is it interesting? Depends on what you find interesting. Ciaran replied with a faint smile. Enjoy yourselves. They hesitated, then hurried away toward the dungeons, casting one last look back at the Great Hall. He says it's interesting, right? Ron muttered. I think so, Harry said, less than certain. Come on, we can't be late. Ciaran watched them go, took his seat in the Great Hall, and silently pitied them for a moment. A banquet hosted by ghosts might not harm the living, but it would hardly be comfortable. He murmured to himself, Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, and let his gaze sweep casually across the tables. He saw Ginny Weasley at the Gryffindor table, her red hair bright, smiling as if she had nothing to worry about. Maybe the timeline had already shifted. Regardless, Ciaran resolved not to leave early. If the basilisk were involved, he didn't want to risk encountering its gaze. In the original events, survival had hinged on a string of lucky reflections and sightings through water, mirrors, or cameras. As an outsider, he couldn't count on the same coincidences, and he certainly hadn't drunk Felix Felicis. Professor Frémont, Professor Trelawney, cheers! Lockhart called, raising his goblet and knocking back his wine with theatrical gusto. Trelawney only nibbled at her drink, reluctant. Ciaran took a small sip and kept his face neutral as he considered the possibilities. I don't like the Halloween feast, Trelawney said softly to him. Something bad always happens on Halloween. Ciaran's attention sharpened. Something bad? Trelawney smiled the vague, distant smile she always wore. You will see, Professor Frémont. She didn't seem to be in a trance, just being characteristically ominous, so Ciaran dismissed it with a private shrug and tried to enjoy the festivities. The house elves had worked hard, and for a while the evening was full of food and laughter. But happy moments were brief. In the span of a heartbeat, the lively crowd on the second floor fell quiet. The professor's expressions hardened. They rose and hurried toward the stairwells. Ciaran decided then that he would avoid being out at night from now on. If the basilisk was loose, being caught outside after dark would be dangerous. He followed the other teachers up to the second floor. You killed my cat! You killed my cat! I'll have you! Argus Filch's voice cut through the hall like a broken bell. Dumbledore and a cluster of staff were already pushing through the students. Between two high windows, smeared across the stone wall about a foot above the floor, someone had scrawled a message. Nearby, Madame Norris hung by her tail from a torch bracket, her body rigid as a board, eyes wide and unblinking as if frozen in terror. The sight made the immediate crowd fall into stunned silence. The great hall had fallen so completely quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Ciaran watched as Dumbledore lifted Madame Norris from the torch bracket. The headmaster's clear blue eyes studied the rigid cat in his hands. His face was unusually grave. Come with me, Mr. Filch, he said. Then he turned to the three students. And you as well, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger. Lockhart hurried past Ciaran and pushed forward. My office is the nearest, headmaster. Just upstairs. You can. Thank you, Gilderoy, Dumbledore replied, not unkindly. The crowd parted, making a path, and Lockhart followed with a pleased, self-important smile. McGonagall and Snape brought up the rear. Ciaran hesitated for a heartbeat. Even if he didn't want to reveal everything he knew, he could not simply stand aside. He was professor of combat, the very sort of person who should be involved when an accident struck Hogwarts. He scanned the throng as he walked, looking for Ginny, but she was nowhere to be seen. The prefects shepherded the students back to their common rooms, while Percy stood straighter than usual. In Lockhart's office, the light was a little dim. The walls were hung with pictures of the professor in various heroic, or at least photogenic, poses. Lockhart lit the candles on his desk, and the room brightened instantly. Dumbledore placed Madame Norris on the spotless surface and began a careful examination. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat in a shadowed corner, faces drawn and worried. Ciaran feigned puzzlement and moved closer to peer at the cat beside Dumbledore. Lockhart seized the opportunity to grandstand. It must be a spell, transfiguration gone wrong, a torture charm perhaps. I've seen such things in my travels. It's a pity I wasn't there when it happened. I could have— Oh, I know the counter curses. His boasting was cut off by Filch's quiet, wrenching sobs. The caretaker's love for Madame Norris was painfully obvious. Even Ciaran felt a tug of sympathy. Lockhart continued to chatter about his experience, punctuating his boasts with nodding portraits. McGonagall and Snape both looked less than impressed. Dumbledore worked silently, wand moving in small, precise circles as he tapped the stiff cat. Madame Norris remained utterly unmoved, like some specimen in a jar. "Professor, what do you think did this? A dark curse? A magical item? A creature?" Ciaran asked, tapping the cat gently with the tip of his wand as if to test Dumbledore's silence. Dumbledore's expression was all seriousness. "The first thing to determine," he said, "is whether Madame Norris is truly dead." Filch's sobbing grew louder. The three students shifted restlessly in their chairs. Finally, Dumbledore straightened. "Madame Norris is not dead, Mr. Filch." Lockhart stopped mid-sentence, as if the microphone had been switched off. Filch stared, eyes wide. "Not dead, but her whole body, she's rigid, like she's frozen solid." "She has been petrified," Dumbledore said. "Petrificus totalis does not necessarily mean death." "Of course," Lockhart piped up, arranging his expression into one of professorial insight. Dumbledore ignored him. Filch, desperate and unconvinced, pointed at Harry. "It was him! I saw him near the second floor. You did it, young man! You killed my cat!" Dumbledore shook his head. "Petrificus totalis is an advanced binding charm. It requires a fair amount of power and a precise knowledge of the spell. I don't believe a second year could cast it so effectively." Filch would not be swayed. He clung to his accusation like a talisman. Harry protested loudly that they had just come from Nearly Headless Nick's Death Day party. They had heard a strange voice and followed it to the second floor, where they found Madame Norris already petrified. They were as innocent as could be. "Allow me to say something, Headmaster." Snape's voice cut in from the shadows, and the three students felt a new wave of apprehension. Ciaran cleared his throat. "I don't think this is a case of Petrificus totalis." Every eye in the room turned to him. The three students' faces flickered with hope, Snape's with annoyance. "Explain," Dumbledore said. Ciaran stepped forward and let Dumbledore's wandlight fall over Madame Norris as he talked. "Petrificus talis is a neuromuscular binding charm. The limbs lock because the nervous system is affected, breathing continues, and there are traces, subtle, of the spellwork if you know where to look. This is different. The cat's posture is unnaturally rigid in a way that suggests a surface, glass-like coating, rather than a muscular lock. There's no sign of wand work, no singing, no residue where a wand would have touched, and nothing consistent with a transfiguration or a time-slowing charm." He paused, watching faces for their reaction. What's more, the effect appears instantaneous and precise. Madame Norris was fixed exactly where she was found, and there were no signs of a struggle. That sort of freezing, without any other external trace, is characteristic of a gaze-based effect. The only creature in the lore we teach that produces such a result is a basilisk. Its direct gaze can kill. An indirect gaze, seeing it through a reflection, or via another creature, can petrify. A low hum of startled murmurs ran through the room. Filch's face went from grief to confusion. Lockhart opened his mouth and closed it again, searching for a way to claim credit. Snape's jaw tightened. Dumbledore's eyes, already grave, took on a new depth of concern. "You are suggesting there is a basilisk in the school," Snape said, voice flat. Ciaran met his gaze without flinching. "I'm suggesting that whatever petrified Madame Norris did so without a wand and without the usual traces of spellwork. That points to a creature with a gaze that can affect living things. A basilisk fits that description." Harry's grip on Ron's sleeve tightened. Hermione's face had gone pale. Dumbledore folded his hands and regarded Ciaran for a long moment. Outside, the castle creaked faintly, as if listening. "No one is to leave the castle," Dumbledore said at last, his voice steady, but carrying an edge of steel. "Filch, you will stay with Madame Norris. Professors, I would ask you to keep the students calm and to see that they return to their dormitories. We will look into this carefully." As Lockhart began to fumble for something, aid, applause, or a line, Snape moved toward the door, already calculating what questions needed answers. The three students exchanged a look of terrified understanding. Ciaran's expression remained controlled. He had seen enough to know that this was only the beginning of a very dangerous puzzle, and a school of wizards had just been told there might be a monster in its midst. Ciaran laid out his deductions, preparing to announce the presence of a basilisk so the Hogwarts staff and students could be warned. "So, Ciaran, what magical creature do you think is responsible for this?" Dumbledore asked. "Basilisk," Ciaran said slowly, enunciating each syllable. The air in the office seemed to go cold and still. A chill passed through everyone there. Harry felt a rush of confusion. What was this basilisk Professor Frémont had mentioned? He watched the other faces around him harden. "Forgive me," Professor McGonagall said, looking straight at Ciaran. "You're not joking, are you?" "I'm fairly certain the creature that's been stalking the castle and petrified Madame Norris is a basilisk," Ciaran replied. "May I add something?" Snape gave a thin, unpleasant smile. "Rumor has it," he said, "that a basilisk's gaze kills. It does not merely petrify." "That is correct, Professor Snape," Ciaran nodded. "A direct look into a basilisk's eyes is instantly fatal." Harry felt a late, icy shiver run through him. So that was why everyone had gone so pale. A direct gaze meant death? Such a terrible creature actually existed? His mind flicked back to the day at the zoo before he came to Hogwarts, when he had understood a snake speaking. Had the strange voice he just heard been the basilisk's? He wanted to tell the professors, but he feared they might misunderstand. He was trapped between wanting to help and being afraid to speak. But what if someone doesn't look directly into the basilisk's eyes? Ciaran continued in a low voice. "Remember the puddle of water beneath Madame Norris? She must have seen the basilisk indirectly, reflected in the water, which would explain why she was petrified rather than killed outright." Everyone did recall the dark water stain under Madame Norris. Could Ciaran's reasoning be right? "Your deduction is very sound, Ciaran," Dumbledore said, nodding. "We should pay careful attention to the location of the pipes from now on. The basilisk appears to be moving through Hogwarts plumbing." Harry went pale. "But Madame Norris," Filch began anxiously. He was no longer clutching at Harry, and Harry felt a sudden wash of relief and gratitude toward Ciaran. "We will cure her, Filch," Dumbledore said gently. "Petrification is not irreversible. Professor Sprout has just acquired some mandrakes. There is a potion with mature mandrake as an ingredient that can restore those who have been petrified." "I'll brew it, Headmaster," Lockhart chirped boldly. "I've made that potion 100 times. I could brew it in my sleep." "Forgive me." Snape's face darkened. "I am the potions master of this school." An awkward silence followed. Lockhart's boast had provoked Snape, and Ciaran inwardly smiled at how unwise that had been. Snape rarely bothered with anything except Harry Potter, but he had no qualms about picking a public quarrel with Lockhart. Other professors might have been more concerned with decorum, but Snape cared little for that. "All right, you may go," Dumbledore said to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The three of them gratefully slipped out of Lockhart's office as though eager to flee. "Ciaran, this discovery came at a critical time," Dumbledore told him. "You flatter me, Headmaster." Ciaran replied, "It's nothing. After all, I am a professor at Hogwarts." "Dumbledore, should we inform everyone about the basilisk?" McGonagall asked, clearly worried. Dumbledore kept his composure. "Yes, of course. From now on, anyone passing by the pipes should first look with a mirror. That way, if they encounter the basilisk, it will only be by reflection and will cause petrification rather than death. And no one is to linger in the corridors after dark. Students must return to their common rooms once the hooters sound. We professors will patrol in pairs to try to prevent further tragedies." "I'll go tell Gryffindor," McGonagall said. "I'll inform Slytherin," Snape added. "I can go to Ravenclaw. I graduated from there," Lockhart offered, hand lifted. "Thank you, Gilderoy," Dumbledore said, then turned to Ciaran. "Hufflepuff, I will leave in your care. Filch, let's take Madame Norris to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey will look after her," Dumbledore finished. One by one, they left Lockhart's office. Ciaran headed straight for the Hufflepuff common room. He had himself been a Hufflepuff when he'd been at Hogwarts. After leaving Lockhart's office, Harry, Ron, and Hermione didn't go straight back to the Gryffindor common room. They slipped into an empty classroom to talk about what they'd seen. Do you think the sound I heard was a basilisk? At the zoo, I could understand what a snake was saying, Harry said, his heart still pounding. He peered into the gloom at his two friends' faces. You're a parcel mouth? Ron blurted, clearly shocked. What? Harry said. A parselmouth, Ron said again. Someone who speaks parcel tongue. Legend has it Salazar Slytherin could speak it. Harry, you might, possibly. Are you saying I'm a descendant of Slytherin? Harry demanded. Please, I'm a Gryffindor. I know that, mate, Ron said quickly. Hermione's voice dropped to a whisper. Slytherin lived over 1,000 years ago. It would be almost impossible to prove, but from the evidence, from that language you heard, there's a chance you could be descended from Slytherin. Impossible. I'm a Gryffindor, Harry protested, though a sliver of doubt had lodged in him. He remembered the Sorting Hat's hesitation at the beginning of term, how it had at one point intended to put him in Slytherin until he insisted otherwise. Could he really have Slytherin blood? The question troubled him. Should I tell anyone about what I heard? Harry asked. Better not, Ron said without hesitation. We know you, we believe you, but others might misunderstand. We believe you, Harry, Hermione added quietly, but other people. At that moment, the classroom door opened. A tall figure stood in the doorway, wand raised. The tip glowed faintly, throwing light across the room. 28, Principal's password. Seeing the figure in the doorway, Harry, Ron, and Hermione felt their hearts drop. Who could it be? Hermione, Harry, Ron, why aren't you three in your common room? What are you whispering about here? Professor McGonagall's voice cut through the corridor. Relief flooded them. McGonagall, not Snape. They hadn't the energy to face points being docked or a detention. Still, McGonagall's look was severe. She watched the three young witches and wizards step out of the classroom and said, Professor Frémont has reported the attacker was a basilisk, a dangerous creature of the dark arts. You all heard that, so why are you still here and not in your common room? Harry, Ron, and Hermione stammered, unable to come up with a coherent answer. Harry had heard a voice earlier and had kept quiet, explaining it would only invite suspicion. He could barely bear the thought that anyone might learn he understood Parseltongue, one of Salazar Slytherin's most notorious talents, and assume he somehow controlled the basilisk. From tonight onward, after nightfall, students at Hogwarts must immediately return to their respective common rooms and are not to loiter in the castle, Professor McGonagall announced. This is Headmaster Dumbledore's decision. She then led the three toward the Gryffindor Tower. Harry felt a small easing of panic. It seemed McGonagall hadn't heard his earlier words. If she had, how could he possibly explain? He kept his silence and was grateful Ron and Hermione trusted him. Professor, are you coming to the common room as well? Hermione asked, cheeks still flushed from being caught out of bounds. Professor McGonagall nodded. I need to go up and give the headmaster's password to the common room, she said. Hermione, Harry, and Ron exchanged a quick look. Hermione summoned her bravery. Professor, she began, on the wall where Madame Norris was attacked, someone wrote something about the Chamber of Secrets. What exactly is the Chamber of Secrets, and who is the heir? Those are baseless rumors, nothing to be taken seriously, Professor McGonagall replied. Hermione started to press further, but they had already reached the portrait on the 8th floor landing that guarded the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. The painting showed a very plump woman in pink, the Fat Lady. Password, the Fat Lady crooned. Fop, Professor McGonagall answered. The Fat Lady swung forward, revealing the round hole in the wall that served as the entrance. The four of them slipped through into the common room, a cozy circular space filled with soft armchairs and warm light. Gryffindor students were still awake, clustered together and buzzing with talk about the Chamber of Secrets, the heir, and poor Madame Norris, who had been attacked. Good evening, Professor McGonagall, the students chorused. McGonagall then announced Dumbledore's new order. The room erupted. You're joking, right? We can't be out at night? Fred Weasley shouted. I wish it were a joke, McGonagall said gravely. But this is the headmaster's ruling. For your safety, we had to make this difficult decision. The crowd vocally complained. Fred, George, Lee Jordan, and others grumbled loudly. Many Gryffindors took pride in being bold and restless. The ban on nightly prowls cut off a favored pastime. Only Ginny Weasley's face changed noticeably in the midst of the clamor. All right, bedtime then, McGonagall said and left. The fat lady's portrait swung closed behind her. Meanwhile, Professor Frémont, Ciaran, made his way to the Hufflepuff common room. The Hufflepuff dormitories are tucked near the passage that leads to the house elves' kitchens in the basement. Like the Gryffindor students, many Hufflepuffs were awake, talking about Madame Norris's attack on the second floor. Professor Frémont, they exclaimed in surprise to see him. Ciaran explained Headmaster Dumbledore's instructions and the new nighttime rule. The Hufflepuffs were worried but not defiant. Unlike Gryffindor, they showed no loud opposition. The prefects must help enforce this, Ciaran added. A few older students, Hufflepuff prefects, nodded. Don't worry, Professor Frémont, they said. After the common room visit, Ciaran returned to his office, shut the door, and began to think through what to do next. A basilisk roaming the castle at night was not a thing to be taken lightly. One careless step could cost a life. By morning, the story had spread. News that Madame Norris had been attacked and petrified, and that a basilisk might be responsible, raced through the castle. Students pored over Hogwarts, a history in the library, each copy quickly borrowed as everyone tried to learn more about the Chamber of Secrets. The Daily Prophet ran the incident with a sensational headline, "Shock! Basilisk on the loose at Hogwarts, victims already appearing." Parents reacted with alarm. Hogwarts received a flood of letters, some pleading for swift action, others threatening to remove their children for safety, and some expressing unwavering faith in Dumbledore's ability to protect the school. Headmaster Dumbledore received the most letters of all. When Ciaran began his first lessons after Halloween, the students greeted him with a barrage of questions about the basilisk, the petrification, and what the school planned to do next. 29. Secret Room Legend. On the 6th floor of Hogwarts, in the combat classroom, Professor Ciaran set a book on the lectern and began to speak. Today, open your books. No need to rush straight into practice duels. Page 35 of a compendium of self-defense charms records a very practical spell. He stopped when he noticed Hermione had raised her hand. "Miss Granger, do you have a question?" he asked evenly. "Professor, could you tell us about the Chamber of Secrets?" Hermione asked clearly. The students around her immediately sat up straighter, every eye turning toward Professor Ciaran. "This is combat class, Miss Granger," he said, keeping his voice calm. "We study how to use spells, how to fight with spells, and how to defend against dangerous magic." "Professor, the basilisk is a dark creature, isn't it?" Hermione interrupted loudly. "You're not wrong. The basilisk would certainly count as dark," Ciaran replied. "But that is Professor Lockhart's area. He's your professor of defense against the dark arts. I teach combat." He knew perfectly well how eager the students were to hear secrets, but he also knew some things were beyond what most students should worry about. Hogwarts had, after all, housed some of the finest witches and wizards, Lockhart aside. "Now, let's continue with a compendium of self-defense charms." Hermione raised her hand again. Harry looked worried. He was afraid Hermione's interruptions would earn them a scolding from Professor Ciaran. "Please forgive me, Professor," she said. "We really want to know about the Chamber of Secrets. Professor, you identified the attacker from Madame Norris's condition. Surely you know something about the chamber?" "Yes, Professor. Please tell us," urged Harry on Hermione's behalf. A chorus of young voices backed him up, pleading with hungry faces. Ciaran scanned them for a moment. They were so persistent, if he told them a little, it wouldn't do any harm. Dumbledore ought not to care. He closed the book. "All right," he said. "The Chamber of Secrets, it's an old legend handed down for 1,000 years. Every student leaned forward. "You know Hogwarts was founded a very long time ago by 4 great wizards, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, Godric Gryffindor, and Salazar Slytherin. They had the same ideals at first, and built this castle as a place to hide from Muggle persecution and to give young magic folk a safe place to learn. In that era, many feared magic. Wizards were often persecuted. Many died. For the first years after the school was founded, the 4 founders were united. They sought out children showing signs of magic and brought them here to be taught." Ciaran paused, glanced at the second years from Gryffindor and Slytherin, then continued. "But as time went on, disagreements grew among the founders, especially between Salazar Slytherin and the others. The rift widened until it could not be mended. Neville, mustering courage, raised his hand. What were they arguing about? Ciaran smiled and answered, bloodline. Salazar believed Hogwarts should accept only students from pure-blood wizarding families. He distrusted Muggle-born witches and wizards. The other three founders insisted the school should teach any child with magic, regardless of blood. Their arguments became fierce. Eventually, Salazar left. Gryffindor scowled at the mention. They valued ability over ancestry. Hermione, a Muggle-born, was one of the school's most outstanding students, after all. The Slytherins shifted uncomfortably. Salazar's stance seemed right to some of them. That is what the official histories record, Ciaran went on. But the Chamber of Secrets belongs to the wild legends. In the stories, Salazar built a secret chamber somewhere within the castle, a place the other founders did not know about. When he left, he sealed it so that it could be opened only by his true heir, whoever could claim his bloodline. Legend says only that true heir can open the chamber and release the thing inside. The creature would purge the school, eliminating those Salazar deemed unworthy to learn magic. He closed his book, letting the words hang in the air. The students stared, hardly blinking, hoping he would continue. Ciaran grinned. So, you're here for stories rather than class? The hands of several students went up and down in embarrassed agreement. Harry asked quietly, Professor, is the thing in the chamber a basilisk? A murmur ran through the room. A basilisk living inside Hogwarts for 1,000 years without anyone discovering it? Based on what we know, Ciaran said, if the Chamber of Secrets actually exists, it is possible a basilisk could be kept there. He knew more than he was saying. He knew the legend, he believed it, but he wouldn't make claims without evidence. The students exchanged nervous glances, especially those whose ancestry might make them targets in the legend. Neville, who considered himself practically Muggle, looked particularly pale. Neville, Harry whispered, you're a pure blood. It's not likely to. No, Neville hissed back, horrified. I'm practically a Muggle. The basilisk would. It's exactly the sort of thing that would. Mr. Longbottom, Ciaran interrupted kindly when he heard the whisper. Don't sell yourself short. You're a talented young man. Neville's face flushed deep red at the compliment, and for a moment the nervousness eased. The classroom settled into a tense hush, the tale of the Chamber of Secrets lingering between them like a cold draft through the old stones of Hogwarts. 30. A meaningful lecture. Sir, Hermione asked, raising her hand, the Chamber of Secrets was built by Slytherin and left for his true heir. So it's impossible for anyone else to open it, right? Ciaran interjected. Normally, that's correct. He knew the chamber could only be opened with Parseltongue, and that in the magical world, speaking Parseltongue wasn't strictly limited to Slytherin's descendants. Harry could speak it, but he was not a Slytherin by lineage. He could because a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul had latched onto him, making him, unknowingly, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. The dark wizard who first bred a basilisk, Herpo the Foul, had also known Parseltongue, but had no connection to Slytherin. Has a descendant of Slytherin already come to Hogwarts? Draco Malfoy asked, frowning. The idea of being forced to obey some heir disgusted him. Harry felt as if his heart had dropped through the floor. He could speak Parseltongue. Did that mean he might be Slytherin's heir? He didn't want to believe it. After more than 1,000 years, could he be sure he had no link to Slytherin? His mother, Lily Evans, was from the Muggle world and would have no such connection, but what of his father, James Potter? Harry knew almost nothing of his family's deeper history. The possibility made his stomach twist. He shuddered at how others might react if they suspected him. Would they call him the heir of Slytherin, the one who opened the chamber and let loose the basilisk? Hermione noticed his sudden change of expression. She connected it with their conversation in the empty classroom a few days before and understood what was troubling him. She raised her hand again. But, Professor, who released the basilisk? Who could have had the chance to open the chamber and let it loose? Harry's thoughts cleared. Of course, others didn't know, but he did. He couldn't possibly be the one who opened the chamber. He'd never hurt a friend. He was a half-blood and had a Muggle-born friend. With that in mind, though still uneasy about his Parseltongue, he felt steadier. On Halloween night, everyone was celebrating, Ciaran said. No one paid much attention to what others were doing, and that made a proper investigation nearly impossible. He knew who had opened the chamber. The fragment of Voldemort's soul in Tom Riddle's diary had manipulated Ginny Weasley into doing it, and the basilisk had been released to carry out the attacks. But Ciaran had no proof. If he simply accused Ginny without being able to destroy the diary, she would likely be blamed and sent to Azkaban. In the original timeline, the soul fragment only revealed itself at the very end when the diary was destroyed by a basilisk fang. The basilisk was slain, and the danger of the chamber was finally gone. Now, the basilisk had not been found, and the location of the chamber remained unknown. Although it might seem straightforward to use powerful dark magic, fiendfire, or to pull the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat to destroy the diary and the soul fragment, those options could have grave consequences. Acting hastily could make it impossible to clear Ginny's name and might even worsen the basilisk problem. If the situation continued, Hogwarts risked being forced to close before the year was out. In the original timeline, Hogwarts had come perilously close to closing for good. "How can the chamber be opened? Is it a piece of dark magic?" one student asked. "What kind of dark creature is a basilisk?" "Professor, please tell us so we can be prepared," Hermione urged. Ciaran hesitated only a moment, then continued. "A basilisk is a terrifying creature of dark magic. It is not a naturally occurring animal. It was bred long ago by a Greek dark wizard named Herpo the Foul, who also knew Parseltongue. The basilisk is enormous, and its gaze can kill. Its lifespan is incredibly long. Herpo's basilisk could have lived 900 years. He paused to let that number sink in. 900 years, muttered several students in shocked voices. Harry could scarcely imagine any creature living that long. It was nearly as old as Hogwarts itself. "Nothing is impossible," Ciaran said. "A basilisk's longevity makes it plausible that one could still be alive in a chamber Slytherin sealed away 1,000 years ago." He gave them a moment, then continued. "I won't go into the breeding method here. What's important now are the basilisk's habits. A basilisk's diet is broad: mammals, birds, reptiles, insects. It isn't picky, but there is one creature it favors above all others: spiders." Ron's face twitched. Harry and Hermione knew why. Ron hated spiders. "If you see spiders scurrying in numbers, be extremely cautious. A basilisk might be nearby," Ciaran warned. The students immediately scribbled notes. Their lives were at stake. "What I'm about to say next is even more important," he added, clearing his throat. "A basilisk's natural enemy is the crow of a rooster. That said, this isn't an invitation to go around making roosters crow. You're more likely to provoke the creature and bring disaster upon yourselves if you try that." The students quickly dismissed the idea of carrying roosters around the castle. "Remember," Ciaran finished, "if you find signs of a basilisk, leave at once. Do not look directly into any pipes. Basilisks could be lurking in them, and you must not meet their gaze." Heads nodded rapidly across the room as everyone wrote down the key points Ciaran had stressed. He then launched into his combat class lecture. The presence of a basilisk had sharpened everyone's attention. Combat had never felt more necessary. Defense against the dark arts had become little more than a book club under Professor Lockhart, and it was unrealistic to expect Lockhart to teach the practical, dangerous knowledge needed now. The students listened, alert and focused, as Ciaran covered what they would need to know to stay alive. Ciaran's lecture spread through Hogwarts like wildfire. Soon students were fashioning little devices to record the crowing of roosters. First years started moving in groups, going to class together, eating in the Great Hall together, and returning to their common rooms together, afraid that anyone found alone might be slain by the basilisk summoned by the heir of Slytherin. Even some professors quietly prepared charms to capture a rooster's crow, just in case. The castle filled with a never-ending chorus of cock-a-doodle-doo, which grew more grating by the day as people clung to the belief that it would keep the basilisk at bay. They had forgotten Ciaran's warning that crowing could sometimes provoke the creature's resentment. Rumors about the heir's identity ran wild. Some suspected a Ravenclaw, others a Gryffindor. Slytherins were still the primary suspects. No one thought a Hufflepuff could be the heir. What worried Harry, Hermione, and Ron most, though, was how badly Ginny had taken it. She had been a wreck. Ron tried to comfort her, but only made her more anxious. "Ron," Percy snapped one day, "Ginny's miserable. She's crying her eyes out. How can you joke around now?" "I already told you I didn't touch that cat," Ron shot back. "I told Ginny the same thing, but she won't believe me. She thinks you might be expelled, and she's terrified." "You'd best behave yourself," Percy said, voice tight. "Stop getting into trouble at night. If you get caught again, you won't be able to defend yourself." Ron's face went red. "You're just worried I'll ruin your chances of becoming head boy, aren't you?" "Gryffindor, 5 points." Percy's own ears reddened. He pushed past Ron, barely acknowledging Harry and Hermione, and went straight back up to the common room. If Ciaran had heard the argument, he would have been baffled. The real reason Ginny was so distraught wasn't Ron's mischief. It was that she'd experienced a period of amnesia. She couldn't remember chunks of time, just like the brief lapse at the Halloween feast. And shortly afterward, Madame Norris had been attacked. Ginny convinced herself she had opened the Chamber of Secrets and unleashed the basilisk, causing the panic. She knew the diary she'd found was a powerful, dangerous item. She had tried to tear it up and flush it away. But the next morning, it lay perfectly intact on her desk. She was on the verge of breakdown and dared not tell anyone. Saying so would mean admitting she might be responsible. She hid it from everyone, even her brothers. Ciaran knew what Ginny was going through, but he couldn't clear her name yet. He couldn't tell her what he knew about the basilisk or take action openly because Ginny's problem involved a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul. If that fragment sensed danger, it could hide or move into another student's belongings, and then he'd have no way to track it. If he couldn't find Riddle's diary, he couldn't locate the Chamber of Secrets, and Ginny would carry the burden forever. He had already revealed the basilisk's existence earlier than in the original timeline, and that might make Voldemort's fragment less patient. Worse, Ginny was a first year and not in his combat class, so he couldn't check on her often. He could only watch discreetly and nudge someone close to her to keep an eye on her. He slipped a hint to Percy, hoping the older Weasley would take extra care of his youngest sister during the tense weeks ahead. "Don't worry, Professor Shia," Percy said, patting his chest. "Ginny's my sister. I'll take care of her." Ciaran trusted Percy. Percy's hunger for advancement was real, but he had always been protective of family. Even in the original timeline, although he'd briefly chosen ambition over kin, he'd ultimately stood with his family. Now he hadn't yet graduated, and his ambition hadn't overtaken his judgment. Percy left Ciaran's office with a proud stride, feeling he'd been entrusted with an important duty and determined not to fail Ginny. Nearly a month passed. No further basilisk attacks occurred. It was as if the creature had only emerged that one night to terrorize Madame Norris and then retreated. The initial panic softened. Many students relaxed, though Muggleborns and half-bloods remained uneasy. It was in that fragile atmosphere that Hogwarts prepared for the Gryffindor versus Slytherin Quidditch match. On Saturday morning, while Ciaran ate breakfast in his office and thumbed through spellbooks, Professors McGonagall and Snape called on him. "Please, have a seat, Professor McGonagall. Professor Snape," Ciaran offered, conjuring 2 soft-backed chairs with a flick of his wand. "No need, Ciaran," McGonagall said briskly. "As you know, today is the Gryffindor-Slytherin match. With so many students gathered, we're concerned the commotion could draw out the basilisk. Professor Snape and I would like you to go to the Quidditch pitch as well. You teach combat." Snape inclined his head in agreement. They were right to be worried. A packed pitch, noisy crowds, and the excitement of a big match could be dangerous. If anything happened to students out there, both houses would be devastated. Other professors either chaired houses or taught subjects that didn't cover defensive tactics, and everyone knew Lockhart was useless. In the end, Ciaran was the only sensible choice. 32. Basilisk Attack Incident. "I see." Ciaran stroked his chin and smiled faintly. "I'm on duty." After a pause, he chuckled. "But I can only get to the Quidditch pitch later, after I finish this table of food at least." "Of course. The match isn't until 11, so there's still time," Professor McGonagall said. "We won't keep you, Professor Frémont." She turned and left Ciaran's office. Professor Snape's sullen face cracked into a grim smile. He gave a curt nod to Ciaran and departed as well. Ciaran returned to his lavish breakfast. He reminded himself that, if memory served, during this Quidditch match, one of the bludgers had been tampered with by Dobby the house elf. Dobby had hoped to injure Harry Potter so Harry would be expelled from Hogwarts and thus spared the danger of the basilisk. Dobby's intentions had been well-meaning, but his methods were disastrous, causing Harry serious trouble instead. Wait, Ciaran frowned. In the original timeline, the basilisk's second attack had come the night after this Quidditch match. Would the basilisk still strike tonight, now that he had changed events by showing up here? Around the castle, students carried small magical trinkets. Nothing exceptional, just devices to record the crowing of roosters. Fred and George had even spent half a day at Hagrid's, where there were roosters in the yard, making lots of little charms to sell. Ciaran thought wryly that he had to be careful. It was easy for others to come through unscathed while he kept stumbling into danger. The basilisk was an immensely well-protected creature. Breaking through its defenses would be a difficult problem. He didn't have a phoenix bearing the sorting hat to him, and the sorting hat didn't contain Gryffindor's sword. Those were Harry's boons. Dumbledore would never allow Harry to face true mortal peril. After all, when Voldemort returned, Harry was widely seen as the only real hope. That view had some foundation. Harry had survived the Avada Kedavra, and his body was suffused with the powerful protective magic cast by his mother, Lily. Voldemort had failed spectacularly more than a decade ago, reduced to a husk, and his power had been at its nadir. Voldemort. Ciaran's expression grew thoughtful, then faintly amused. Voldemort's Horcruxes were sources of fragments of his power. The Ravenclaw diadem had already had some of its power absorbed back by him, damaging that part of his soul. He just hadn't dealt with the Horcruxes entirely. Because of that, Voldemort had only reached level 4, advanced, in general magic, and level 4, intermediate, in transfiguration. The thought made Ciaran smile a little. Time raced on. It was already 10:50, 10 minutes before the 11 o'clock match. From the direction of the Quidditch pitch came a rolling tide of cheers and clamor, the roar of the crowd rising and falling. The castle itself was quieter. Most students were either watching the match or making their way to it. Ciaran closed his office door and prepared to leave. He had promised McGonagall and Snape he'd keep an eye on things. On a matter like this, he wouldn't break his word. Another swell of cheers came from the pitch as the Gryffindor players made their entrance. Names floated on the air. Harry Potter, Fred Weasley, George Weasley, Oliver Wood, Alicia Spinnet, Angelina Johnson, Katie Bell. Ah, I'm going to be late. A disheveled little boy with ash-blonde hair came hurtling down the stairs. A camera hung around his neck. He rushed down 2 steps at a time, lifting the camera in his left hand as he darted past a corner and vanished toward the pitch. Ciaran locked his door, his wand tucked into the inner pocket of his robe where he could draw it with his right hand at once. Are you off to the match as well? Ciaran, I thought you weren't much for this sort of thing. A gentle voice called from the stairwell. It was Dumbledore. He didn't look like he was heading for the pitch so much as for the Great Hall. Ciaran smiled. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape asked me to keep watch. As the Professor of Combat, I can't very well refuse. I'd hate you to dock my pay, sir. Dumbledore chuckled. No, I wouldn't dock your pay for such a small thing, unless you're wasting food and also... His voice cut off. His face went suddenly grave. A few steps up the stairs, a small wizard stood frozen, rigid, his left hand still holding his camera. It was the lad who had just run downstairs, Colin Creevey. Ciaran recognized him instantly. The earnest boy who shadowed Harry Potter all day, always ready to take photographs. In the original timeline, it was Colin who had been attacked and petrified that night, but it wasn't supposed to be morning now. How could the basilisk be active at this hour? And where was Ginny? Ciaran hurried down the stairs. There were no other students on the second floor, only the distant sound of something in an empty classroom. Then Peeves, the poltergeist, whooped out, waving something irrelevant in his hand. Ciaran returned to the third-floor landing and asked, "How is he?" Dumbledore bent over the boy and examined him carefully, wand in hand, his expression extremely serious. "The same symptoms as Madame Norris," he said quietly. "Both are petrified." He took the camera from Colin's stiff hand, opened the back with a flick of his wand, and a small burst of hot air hissed out. Ciaran smelled the sharp tang of burning plastic. "It melted," Dumbledore murmured. "Luckily." He looked up at Ciaran. If that camera had not been between him and the creature, Colin would have met the basilisk's true gaze. We would be looking at a corpse, not a petrified child. His voice folded into the hush of the stairwell. Then, with a gravity that hushed even the echoes, Dumbledore said, "It seems, Ciaran, you were right. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened again." "Please forgive me," Professor Dumbledore said. "I had always doubted your deductions, Ciaran." Ciaran had no retort. So Professor Dumbledore had never really believed his deductions, which were, in truth, just his intimate knowledge of the original timeline reshaped as logical inference. Working backward from the outcome had made everything far easier than anyone imagined. Dumbledore bent to lift the unfortunate first-year Colin Creevey. Compared with an adult like Ciaran, Dumbledore was tall. Colin was only 11. "I'll take Colin to the hospital wing first. Ask Madame Pomfrey to examine him," Dumbledore said. "Ciaran, could you go to the Quidditch pitch and make sure all the students return to the castle? I'm sure Minerva and Severus will be glad to help." He carried Colin toward the hospital wing. Ciaran hurried out of Hogwarts Castle, drew his wand, and apparated to the Quidditch pitch. Players from 2 houses were warming up overhead, circling and practicing, while Madame Hooch, the flying instructor for first years, stood by and watched the time. The stands were nearly full of students, with a scattering of professors mixed in. Professor McGonagall in the Gryffindor section, Severus Snape among the Slytherins, everyone in their house colors. Harry was about to mount his broom when a figure burst onto the pitch, wand raised, face grave. Harry's stomach dropped. Madame Hooch glanced at Ciaran and said, "Professor Frémont, you're late." She knew McGonagall and Snape had asked Ciaran to come. Ciaran raised his wand to his throat and cast Sonorous. "The match is cancelled," he amplified. Boos and shouts erupted from the stands. The players who had been airborne drifted down, disgruntled. Professor Frémont, we still have to play. For the Quidditch Cup," Oliver Wood shouted. Ciaran ignored him and continued, his voice carrying across the pitch. "All students of all houses must return immediately to their respective common rooms. No unauthorized outdoor excursions at any time. House prefects, perform your duties and take responsibility for your houses." The discontented clamoring grew louder until McGonagall called down from the stands. "What's happened, Professor Frémont?" "A student has been petrified. Another attack," Ciaran replied. "The victim is a Gryffindor." McGonagall's face drained of color. The crowd fell silent, wide-eyed and frightened. This time it wasn't an animal, but a student. "Minerva, please come with me to the hospital wing," Ciaran said. "Severus, Madame Hooch, please see that the students are escorted back to their common rooms." He and McGonagall hurried into the castle and went straight to the hospital wing. Other teachers, alarmed by the announcement, came out of their offices and took over escort duties. Corridors were patrolled in pairs or threes, and no student was allowed outside. Tension was thick in the Gryffindor common room. The victim, according to Ciaran, was one of their own. Who could it be? Harry, Ron, and Hermione clustered in a corner. Harry lowered his voice. "Should I tell them what I know?" Ron and Hermione understood him. Harry had been hearing strange voices in the castle before the attacks, voices he could understand because he could speak Parseltongue. But Ron urged caution. "Harry, hearing things others can't in the magical world is bad enough. There have been 2 attacks now. We all know you aren't the heir of Slytherin and you haven't controlled a basilisk, but other people might not see it that way." Hermione added, "Even if you told them, it wouldn't prove anything. You aren't controlling a basilisk. Whoever the heir is could be somewhere hiding. If you reveal you understand Parseltongue, you might draw the heir's attention. Next time it could be you." Convinced by his friends, Harry dropped the idea. He didn't want to be misunderstood, especially when he knew he was innocent. Ginny approached them, pale and trembling. "Ginny, calm down. You're not safe from feeling scared, but you won't be attacked just for being pure blood." Hermione tried to soothe, though Ron pointed out, Hermione's muggle-born and Harry's half-blood. They could be targets, too. Ginny's panic only deepened, and the 3 of them did their best to comfort her. The hospital wing. Colin Creevey lay on a bed, stiff and motionless. Madame Pomfrey examined him carefully, while Dumbledore stood nearby, his face grave. McGonagall hurried in and grew ashen at the sight. Ciaran came in behind her. Madame Pomfrey's diagnosis was blunt. Petrified again. We can only wait until Professor Sprout's mandrakes have matured. Only the mandrake restorative potion can revive these victims. Dumbledore nodded without speaking. Ciaran sighed. Colin didn't look directly into the basilisk's eyes. That may have saved him from a worse fate. The Chamber of Secrets, McGonagall began urgently. The chamber has indeed been opened again, Dumbledore confirmed. Minerva, explain the situation to the students of each house. They must understand how serious this is and stop any idea of roaming the castle at night. McGonagall left at once to do as he asked. 34. Encounter on the road. By the way, Ciaran, I need you and the other professors to patrol Hogwarts Castle, Dumbledore said. I'll join the patrols later. Okay. Ciaran nodded and left the ward. He hadn't gone far when a loud voice called his name. Ciaran! Ciaran! It was Rubus Hagrid, Hogwarts gamekeeper. In the original timeline, he wouldn't become Professor of Care of Magical Creatures until the next year. Hagrid, what are you doing here? Ciaran asked. Were you at the Quidditch pitch watching the match too? Hagrid wore Gryffindor colors, gold and red, and with his giant blood, he towered over them. Even Dumbledore looked a head shorter beside him. Ciaran was much smaller in comparison. They had known each other since their school days. Hagrid's face was grave. Which student had an accident? I. Lower your voice, Hagrid. Madame Pomfrey poked her head out of the hospital wing and glared. Ah, sorry, Madame Pomfrey. Hagrid stammered, embarrassed. He knew he shouldn't shout inside the hospital wing. Let's go this way, Ciaran said, steering him around a corner to get further from the wards. The victim is Colin Creevey, a Gryffindor. I'm about to inform the other professors and have them patrol the castle today. Hagrid's face fell. I know Colin, he said. Such a proper little Gryffindor, so he's the one. Then his expression hardened. I need to breed more roosters. Basilisks don't like roosters. Ciaran shook his head. Finding a bunch of roosters is only a stopgap. We need to get rid of the basilisk for good. So long as it exists, Hogwarts is not safe. He thought to himself. The chamber's entrance was probably behind Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. 50 years ago, when Tom Riddle was at Hogwarts, he had discovered the Chamber of Secrets and released the basilisk. Myrtle was killed then. Colin and Mrs. Norris had only been petrified, which could be cured with potions. For him to go down into the chamber alone and try to kill the basilisk would be suicide with his current magic. In the original story, Harry could slay the basilisk because Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, blinded it, removing its deadliest weapon, and he also had Gryffindor's sword. Ciaran didn't have a phoenix to help him now. He reminded himself there were many powerful wizards at Hogwarts. He might find an excuse to bring this to Dumbledore's attention. He had to be careful. He had to conceal his status as a transmigrator. If he revealed too much too soon about the chamber's location, the fragment of Voldemort's soul inhabiting Tom Riddle's diary might sense trouble and hide. Without evidence, Ginny Weasley would carry the blame. Even if no one went to Azkaban, since there had been no murders, only petrifications, expulsion was likely, like Hagrid's fate 50 years ago. And the diary, after it was torn up and flushed down the drain, had somehow returned to Ginny's desk. The soul fragment had probably drained much of Ginny's life force. Ciaran had a good relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. He was, after all, a Hogwarts professor, and he felt responsible for Ginny's safety. He was determined to expose Voldemort's plot when he could. He knew Ginny was innocent. The attacks were the diary's doing, manipulating her. How to open the chamber and kill the basilisk, those were problems to solve with allies, not alone. Professor Frémont Hagrid, how's the student? A voice asked. Professor Flitwick hurried up with Professor Sprout, Snape, and Lockhart trailing behind. Ciaran shook his head. Not good. Like Madame Norris, he was petrified by the basilisk. Fortunately, a camera blocked some of it. Thank goodness for that, Professor Sprout said, visibly relieved. Flitwick and Snape both let out small sighs. Only Lockhart grinned, flashing white teeth. Don't worry, I've always regretted never coming face to face with a basilisk. Why, I'm quite practiced in dealing with dark creatures. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, 5-time winner of Witch Weekly. He went on boasting, and the other professors shot him annoyed looks. Lockhart forced an embarrassed smile and shut up. Dumbledore wants us patrolling the castle in pairs or trios, Ciaran said. Take extra care around the pipes. The basilisk might be moving through them. Professor Snape, Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, please go back to your common rooms, warn your students, and make sure no one leaves. The 3 deans nodded gravely and hurried off to their houses. Hagrid, I'll leave you with Lockhart, Ciaran said, with a knowing look. Be careful. Hagrid got the meaning immediately. Lockhart's true limits had become painfully obvious over the last months. Ciaran was warning him not to rely on Lockhart, despite his title as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Lockhart beamed. Professor Frémont, rest easy. With me, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, on the job, the basilisk wouldn't dare show itself. Hagrid rolled his eyes. Ciaran was slightly exasperated but said nothing as he walked toward Gryffindor Tower. Around the next corner, he could still hear Lockhart's ongoing monologue, boasting of glorious deeds that belonged to other wizards, chattering away at Hagrid with no concern whether Hagrid replied. 35. Grand Inspection. Ciaran stood on the 8th floor in front of the fat lady's portrait, about to give the password when the portrait swung open on its own. Professor McGonagall was climbing out. She froze and blinked. Professor Frémont? She asked, surprised. Ciaran stepped forward. Professor McGonagall, may I come in? I'd like to say a few words. He hesitated, then added, Later, you and I will be paired to patrol the castle. McGonagall, still puzzled, nodded and ducked back inside. The Gryffindor students peered from the common room and watched the portrait swing shut again as McGonagall followed Professor Frémont and Ciaran inside. Their faces tightened with anxiety. Whatever announcement came next could only be worse. They exchanged nervous looks and then all fixed their attention on Ciaran. Although Ciaran was a Hufflepuff alumnus, this was his first time in the Gryffindor common room. He had no leisure to admire it. His eyes swept the room like lightning. He saw Ginny Weasley looking frightened. She grew noticeably tenser when his gaze lingered on her. Ciaran purposely let his look pass. He couldn't risk Ginny finding out he had discovered Riddle's diary. That would alert the splinter of Voldemort's soul and invite unpredictable, dangerous consequences. Professor, have you caught the culprit? Is the basilisk subdued? George Weasley called out. Ciaran shook his head. We have no leads on the Heir of Slytherin yet, and the basilisk has not been found. We can help, Professor. We know this castle, Fred offered eagerly. Absolutely not. McGonagall's voice went ice cold. She fixed the Weasley twins with a stern look. This is not something for students. The professors will deal with the basilisk. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged a guarded look. They still suspected Draco Malfoy of being the Heir of Slytherin and had been brewing Polyjuice Potion, hoping to slip into the Slytherin common room and unmask him. But there was no proof Malfoy was the heir. Despite his quarrels with them, later events in the original timeline showed Draco was not a murderer or a fanatic. He and his wife abandoned the old blood pride teachings when raising their son. Otherwise, how could Harry and Ginny's youngest child grow up to be the closest friend of Malfoy's only son? At the moment, Draco hadn't hardened by Voldemort's later reign and could still be swayed by other influences. The trio agreed silently that without solid evidence, accusing Malfoy now might only tip him off and prompt him to hide or destroy proof. They would wait. You should stay in the common room. No one is to leave after sunset, Ciaran said, looking directly at Fred and George, as well as at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The 5 Gryffindors, all too eager for adventure, avoided his gaze and shuffled apart, slightly embarrassed. Ciaran had another reason for coming, to create an excuse for what he intended to do next. All right, Professor McGonagall, let's go. He turned and left the common room. McGonagall followed, wand at the ready. We'll inspect Gryffindor Tower. They drew their wands and set off. Today the castle would be combed, though Ciaran knew it was an almost impossible task. Hogwarts had accumulated 1,000 years of secrets that even Dumbledore did not fully comprehend. Teachers moved in pairs, ghosts escorted groups, and no one dared patrol alone. Dumbledore had insisted on it, at least 2 people per group. It was just past 11 in the morning when the patrols began. The teachers and ghosts swept the corridors again and again, finding nothing useful. By 5 in the afternoon, with stomachs grumbling from having had only breakfast, students from all 4 houses were shepherded down to the Great Hall for a late meal. After dinner, the teachers led them back to their common rooms. With sunset approaching, the professors forbade anyone to leave. The teachers believed this was the most dangerous time. The staff finished their own supper quickly and then paired up once more to scour the castle for anomalies. Night fell and the patrols continued, still no trace of the basilisk. At last, in the small hours, the exhausted teachers returned to their offices to sleep. Ciaran, however, lay awake thinking about how to expose the Chamber of Secrets. He finally hit upon a plan before dozing off. Over the next few days, the castle remained under strict lockdown. Students could not move unescorted. A teacher or a ghost had to accompany them wherever they went. One afternoon, in the staff common room, Gilderoy Lockhart burst in, overly excited and eager to be useful. To help the students learn to defend themselves, he announced, I propose a dueling club. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, 5-time Witch Weekly winner for Most Charming Smile, will serve as honorary chair of the club. Temporarily, of course. I hope you will all agree. Ciaran felt a quick thrill. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. If Lockhart hadn't suggested a dueling club, Ciaran would have. He knew the event would force revelations. In the right moment, it could make Harry's ability to speak Parseltongue public. That revelation would be useful. That's a good idea, McGonagall began, but Lockhart cut in, effusive. Professor McGonagall, you agree, don't you? He turned to the other staff with beseeching eyes. Any objections? I'll ask Professor Dumbledore last. He'll surely grant this small, practical request. With that, he bustled off toward the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. McGonagall caught her breath, clearly annoyed. He's always like that, she muttered. Severus Snape, scowling as always, looked mildly intrigued. I'm going to watch this dueling club, he said. When I was young, I was a champion duelist, Professor Flitwick announced loudly, clambering onto a chair because he was simply too short to be seen otherwise. Of course, I wouldn't miss the chance to teach the students. I am the professor of combat, Ciaran said, so I must take part in the dueling club. Inwardly, he added, if I don't attend personally, how will Harry's Parseltongue ever be exposed? In the original timeline, Harry's ability came out in public. Ciaran couldn't risk any unexpected change now. He knew it was a little unfair to Harry, who would be misunderstood for a while, but the priority was certainty. With you 3, we're relieved, Professor Sprout nodded, a quiet rebuke to Lockhart's usefulness that none of the others bothered to contradict. I'll have to see just how capable our dueling club's honorary chairman, and our professor of defense against the dark arts, truly is, Severus Snape said, an almost smile cutting across his gloomy face. Everyone knew Snape had long coveted the defense against the dark arts chair. He could barely hide his malice toward Lockhart, and an occasion like this set his temper sharper than usual. Severus, watch your tone. He is a professor, after all. We cannot undermine the students' confidence at such a critical moment, Professor McGonagall warned. Don't worry, Minerva. I know my limits, Snape replied, though the gleam in his eyes beneath his greasy hair betrayed more enthusiasm than his words admitted. Lockhart returned at that moment, all smiles and flamboyance. Professor Dumbledore has approved my request, he announced. We shall hold the first dueling club meeting at 8 o'clock next Friday evening. He unrolled a parchment, dipped a quill, and flourished out a notice. I must post this at once. Student interest will be high, he chirped, scribbling with evident satisfaction. Ciaran thought. The students may be looking forward to a dueling club, but they aren't looking forward to you teaching it. The news spread through Hogwarts almost instantly. Many students were excited. Combat class had taught them a host of useful techniques and emergency responses. After what had happened to Faith in Defense Against the Dark Arts, they wanted somewhere to show what they'd learned. A dueling club was the perfect outlet. An incident in Professor Snape's potions class, a small commotion with Harry at the center, was being muttered about, but Snape lacked proof and had come away from the confrontation empty-handed. He brooded for nearly a week, but his mood lightened somewhat by the thought of dueling Lockhart. On Friday evening, the professors led a cluster of volunteers down to the Great Hall. Several long tables had been cleared away, and a gilded stage now ran along one wall, dozens of candles floating overhead to give the place a theater-like glow. Students from every year packed in, from first years to seventh years, all clutching wands and humming with excitement. Naturally, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were there, squeezed into the chattering cluster. "I wonder who will be teaching," Hermione speculated loudly. "Professor Flitwick was a dueling champion when he was young. Maybe Professor Frémont, since he's our combat teacher." Before she finished, Harry and Ron let out a resigned groan, and Hermione realized what it meant. Gilderoy Lockhart swept onto the stage in a radiant magenta robe, followed by 3 other professors. Hermione pointed. "Look, Flitwick and Frémont are there." "Why is Snape here?" Ron frowned. "Snape's always wanted defense against the dark arts," Harry said. "He'll see this as an opportunity." "Compared to Lockhart, at least Snape has substance," Ron muttered. Hermione glared at him. She was a fan of Lockhart, and defended him weakly. "Professor Lockhart is an accomplished wizard. He just might not be the best teacher." "Quiet, everyone, quiet," Lockhart called. He hardly raised his voice. No one had told him about the sonorous charm, it seemed, but he beamed regardless. Ciaran smirked inwardly. A graduate of Hogwarts should know that basic amplification. "Because of the basilisk, I petitioned Professor Dumbledore to allow me to open a dueling club to train you to face danger," Lockhart proclaimed, spreading his hands wide. "Professor Dumbledore graciously approved my humble request. I have faced such dangers countless times. See my published works for details." He laughed and, with an affected air of ceremony, pointed at Snape. "Allow me to introduce my assistant, Professor Snape. Professor Flitwick and Professor Frémont will form the instruction team." A silence ran through students from the non-Slytherin houses. Professor Snape's presence chilled some of them. Snape's face remained sullen, but there was a clear spark of anticipation in his eyes. He had little patience for Lockhart's flamboyance. "Step back, please," Lockhart instructed, beaming at the crowd. "Your potions master and I are about to duel. Relax, it's only a demonstration. When I am through, I shall return Professor Snape to you completely unharmed." Lockhart turned to face Snape. Ciaran and Flitwick stepped aside to give the 2 men room. The students pressed in, leaning forward with bright, eager faces. They had never seen a duel between professors before, and the excitement in the Great Hall was almost palpable as Lockhart and Snape squared off on the gilded stage. 37. Real Wizard Showdown. "Professor Flitwick, how many moves do you think Lockhart can withstand against Snape?" Ciaran asked quietly, though his face gave nothing away. Professor Flitwick waved his wand and replied with a wry smile, "If he can withstand even 1 move from Snape, I'd be impressed." Ciaran smiled. "Ciaran, don't laugh," the little professor chided, his beard bristling and eyes wide. "I don't know how Dumbledore managed to hire Lockhart for Hogwarts. His knowledge is hardly adequate for a teaching post." "Defense against the dark arts. You know the history," Ciaran said. "Decades ago, after Lord Voldemort left Hogwarts and traveled the world, he returned hoping to secure the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher and to hide one of his Horcruxes, Ravenclaw's diadem. Albus Dumbledore, then headmaster, saw through Voldemort's plan and refused him outright. Enraged, Voldemort cursed the Defense Against the Dark Arts position. No one who held it could last more than a single year. Over the years, the curse became common knowledge in the magical world. Not even Dumbledore could lift it, and fewer wizards were willing to take the post. "But Lockhart," Professor Flitwick muttered, his voice so low Ciaran could barely make out the words. Lockhart, loud as ever, was positioning himself for the duel. "As you can see, we hold our wands in the standard dueling stance." Lockhart and Snape faced one another and bowed, Lockhart with grand flourishes, Snape with a curt, impatient nod. They raised their wands to their chests like swords. Looking at the hushed, electric crowd, Lockhart announced theatrically, "On the count of 3, Professor Snape, we will begin. Of course, neither of us will take the other's life. All right, listen to my countdown. 3, 2, 1. They moved almost together. Before Lockhart could form a word, Snape snapped, "Expelliarmus!" A blistering red jet of light cut across the stage. Lockhart was hit, stumbled, and was hurled backward off the platform, slamming into a wall. He slid down helplessly and crumpled on the floor. The hall erupted. "Well done, Professor Snape!" cried voices. Draco Malfoy and a group of Slytherins applauded raucously. Many young witches pressed their hands to their mouths, eyes wide. "Is he all right? Is Professor Lockhart all right?" they whispered. "Probably for the best he lost," a few boys muttered under their breath. Ciaran shook his head. Choosing Snape as an opponent had been foolish. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore was by far the strongest wizard alive. Voldemort had not yet returned. And after him, the strongest included McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, and Sprout. Of those, Snape was arguably the most formidable. Lockhart lay on the floor for a moment, then staggered to his feet. His hat had tumbled to the ground and his hair stood on end. He looked dazed, but Snape had controlled the spell's force. It was a humiliating blow, not a fatal one. A young witch returned Lockhart's wand. "Ah, thank you, Miss Brown," Lockhart declared, immediately putting on his showman's smile. "Well, everyone, I trust you all saw that. A rather unfortunate misstep. Professor Snape's Expelliarmus caught me off guard. But let it be a lesson in the power of that charm. I only did it to demonstrate its effectiveness and broaden your horizons." His boasting drew cold looks. Ciaran saw the hard, dangerous expression on Snape's face and quickly intervened. "All right, Professor Lockhart, Professor Snape, please step aside and rest. It's time for Professor Flitwick and me to take the stage." Lockhart affected nonchalance and slunk to one side. Snape sneered and retreated to a corner. Ciaran moved to the center of the stage and faced Professor Flitwick. They bowed, a genuine, friendly gesture. "Let's keep this a friendly match," Ciaran said. Flitwick nodded. Ciaran's chest warmed with a quiet thrill. This was his first real duel against a powerful wizard since absorbing the force points from Ravenclaw's diadem and increasing his magical level. The students around them buzzed with excitement. Flitwick's skill in charms was well known, and they were eager to see how Ciaran would perform. 3, 2, 1. Ciaran counted down, and they began. "Expelliarmus!" Flitwick cried, a brilliant red streak shooting from his wand. "Protego!" Ciaran answered, a shield charm snapping into place and shunting the red blast aside. He followed immediately with a banishing charm meant to unsettle Flitwick's footing. The little professor, nimble and powerful despite his size, countered with a volley of spells. He launched Incendio, flames leaping toward Ciaran. The crowd gasped and took a step back. Ciaran moved with practiced lightness and slipped out of the flame's path, then fired back an Incarcerus. Flitwick parried with Protego. Then, with a few graceful flicks of his wand, Flitwick unleashed a series of stronger, sweeping spells, the force so great even the students far from the stage felt it, a sharp wind against their cheeks. Ciaran aimed at a stone pillar in the great hall. The statue seated atop it sprang to life, charging across the floor to interpose itself between him and Flitwick. Stone cracked as the statue's chest shattered with a dull thud. The two duelists traded spell after spell, lights and sounds layering the air above the stage in brilliant, crackling color. Occasionally, a muffled collision rang out when one spell collided with another. The students backed away, pressed against the walls, watching in awe. They all knew both combatants were holding back, and that other professors stood ready to intervene if necessary, yet that knowledge did nothing to dampen their amazement. The display was intense and majestic. No one present could deny they were witnessing a true wizardly contest. 38. Duel in the Dueling Club. "So amazing!" Ron gaped, mouth hanging open, as he watched Ciaran and Professor Flitwick on the stage, trading spells with effortless precision. Every flick of their wands sent a new burst of magic flying. His eyes were full of longing, as though he could already see himself up there, basking in cheers and applause. He started laughing stupidly. Harry and Hermione were stunned, too. This was the first time they had really seen adults duel properly. They had faced Professor Quirrell in their first year, but that had been helped by other factors. This was the kind of wizarding combat they had always imagined. Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and even older students like Percy watched from the benches with looks of awe. Professor Snape and several other teachers watched with interest. "Multi-blast!" Ciaran called, sending a spray of small projectiles careening toward Flitwick. "Sandstorm!" Flitwick answered. A blue flash erupted and shredded the little missiles into nothing. "All right, Ciaran, that's enough," Flitwick said, taking a step back to avoid a few stray fragments. Ciaran lowered his wand, swallowed the last of the spell on his tongue, and slid the wand back into his pocket. He smiled. "Very well, then." Facing the assembled students, he announced, "The demonstration is over. Pair up and practice freely, just like in class." To the students it had seemed a draw, but Ciaran knew better. Flitwick had held back. Ciaran had been close to full power and had still gained no advantage. Flitwick was, without doubt, a level 6 wizard. Whether he was stronger than Snape was another question. The younger wizards stared at Ciaran and Flitwick with bright, hungry eyes. The duel had been inspiring. The 4 adult instructors, Ciaran, Flitwick, Snape, and Lockhart, moved through the crowd, organizing pairs. Lockhart suggested Neville and Justin Finch Fletchley, but Snape objected. He cut across the hall and approached Harry and Ron. "I think the dream team should be broken up," Snape sneered. "Weasley, you pair with Finnegan. As for Potter," Harry instinctively edged closer to Hermione. "I don't think that's a good match," Snape went on coldly. "Malfoy, over here. Let's see what happens when you duel the famous savior, Mr. Potter. Miss Granger, Miss Bulstrode will be happy to partner with you." Draco Malfoy swaggered over with a smug grin. Behind him came a Slytherin girl whose stout bulk reminded Harry of a painting he had seen in one of Lockhart's books, Vacationing with Hags. Miss Bulstrode was large and solidly built, almost Dursley-like. Her thick, layered chin jutted forward aggressively. Hermione forced a smile, but Bulstrode ignored her. Ciaran watched Harry and Malfoy with interest. He remembered that, in the original timeline, it was during this duel that Harry first revealed his ability to speak Parseltongue. Ciaran hoped the same thing would happen again. "Right, face your partners," Lockhart chirped, returning to the stage as if nothing were amiss. "First, bow to your partner and—" Harry and Malfoy didn't bow. They stood like two predators sizing one another up, wands clenched. "Wands up, get ready," Lockhart called. "When I count to 3, cast the disarming charm. Your charms teacher and your combat professor have taught you this. Only disarm, no dangerous spells. 3, 2, 1. Before Lockhart even finished, Malfoy fired. He'd cheated, he'd moved on Lockhart's 2, and Snape, who was closest to them, simply watched without intervening. The curse struck Harry on the head. He felt as if someone had hit him with a bat. Dizziness blurred his vision, the world spun, and he staggered. Heedless of the rules, Harry remembered something Professor Frémont had said in combat class. When you aren't at your best and the enemy is at his peak, sometimes the best defense is a direct counterattack. A sudden offensive move can stop the opponent from lining up their next blow and buy you a moment to recover. "Ric de Sempra," Harry shouted, pointing his wand at Malfoy, who was still smirking. A silver jet of light struck Malfoy in the stomach. He doubled over, laughing between gasps. "I said only disarm," Lockhart crowed from the stage, panic threading his voice. Ciaran scanned the hall. The situation was still under control, so he allowed the duels to continue. Flitwick and Snape seemed to share the same view. No one paid much attention to Lockhart now. Professors on the fringes, McGonagall and Sprout among them, frowned, but they were not running the dueling club, and since nothing serious had happened yet, let Ciaran and the other instructors preside. Malfoy, clutching his midriff, managed a hoarse laugh. "Serpensortia," he spat. A long black snake shot from the tip of Malfoy's wand, thumping onto the floor between them. It coiled, lifted its head, and reared as if ready to strike. The great hall screamed and backed away in unison, clearing a wide circle around the two boys. No one wanted to get near the dark serpent. Ciaran's eyes lit up. 39, Parseltongue exposed. No one else can touch that snake, Ciaran thought. The young duelists in his area had all recoiled at the sight of the black snake, falling back to the edges of the platform and unwilling to approach. Naturally, the duels came to a halt. Ciaran took the chance to step over to Harry and Malfoy, who were standing not far from Snape. "Don't move, Potter," Snape said lazily. He seemed almost pleased to see Harry frozen in place, staring at the angry-looking black serpent. "I'll get it out of here," Ciaran thought. How can this be? He was about to pursue getting rid of the snake himself when Lockhart's voice rang out, high and eager. "Let me!" Lockhart brandished his wand and made a grand gesture at the black snake. It had the exact opposite effect. With a loud crack, the snake was jerked upward as if struck by an unseen force, launching 3 or 4 meters into the air before slamming back down. It writhed in obvious pain, hissing and flicking its tongue, and slid toward Justin Finch-Fletchley, the nearest Hufflepuff. The snake raised its head, bared its fangs, and adopted a clearly aggressive stance. Ciaran felt a flush of relief. Lockhart's blunder had done his work for him. He didn't have to move and risk becoming the center of attention. Everyone knew Lockhart's reputation. It was entirely believable that he'd made a spectacle of himself. Professors and students alike watched with varying degrees of shock and amusement. Harry stood rooted to the spot, stunned. His feet, almost against his will, began to move forward. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then, as if another voice spoke through him, he shouted at the snake, "Stop! Leave him alone! Go!" Then something incredible happened. The black snake collapsed onto the platform like a length of heavy, black hose. It immediately assumed a docile, obedient posture, its vertical pupils fixed on Harry. The fear that had been knotting Harry's chest began to dissolve. He knew, with a certainty he couldn't explain, that the snake would no longer attack. He didn't understand how he knew, only that he did. Harry glanced over at Justin, expecting to see relief or gratitude. Instead, Justin was pale and terrified, clutching at his friends and trying to edge back behind them. "What sort of trick is this?" he cried, voice shaking. He wanted to run. Only the rule that students must leave the Great Hall with their teachers stopped him. With a quick, deliberate flourish, Ciaran waved his wand, and with a soft pop, the black snake vanished. He looked at Harry with a strange, calculating expression. He already suspected what had happened, but he had to look as if he were discovering it in front of everyone. Heads turned, and the Great Hall filled with wary, unsettling glances. Harry felt them like a physical weight. He had wanted to hide this. He had not wanted anyone to know he could speak to snakes. And now the secret was out. Parseltongue. The ability to speak to serpents was, in the British wizarding world, closely associated with Salazar Slytherin and his heirs. "You understand Parseltongue, Harry?" Professor Flitwick asked, astonishment plain in his voice. "No," Harry hurried to explain. "I mean, I can speak it, but I'm nothing to do with Salazar Slytherin. I'm a Gryffindor." A ripple ran through the students. A few Gryffindors exchanged uncertain looks, but students from Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff watched him with thinly veiled suspicion. Even the professors traded uneasy glances. Ciaran cleared his throat and made a show of announcing an end to the meeting. "All right, today's duel club is over. We'll let you know when the next one will be. Go to bed, it's late." So the students were shepherded back to their common rooms under an atmosphere of strained silence. Professors patrolled the castle in pairs well into the night, and when they finally stopped their rounds and retreated to their offices, it was with little comfort and a lot of worry. Harry lay in bed that night and could not get warm. His bed, usually a refuge, felt cold despite the covers and his body heat. "Do they really think I'm the heir of Slytherin?" he wondered, turning on his side. He tossed and turned, going over the incident again and again until exhaustion finally pulled him into an uneasy sleep. He woke to the usual morning clamor. "Harry, don't worry," Neville said quietly when he saw Harry's downtrodden face. "We don't think you're the heir of Slytherin." "Relax, mate," Seamus chimed in. "Slytherin lived over 1,000 years ago. If you've got a drop of his blood, so what? That doesn't make you a monster." Ron and Dean added their own reassurances. Surrounded by his friends, Harry felt some of the weight lift. Even if many at Hogwarts suspected him, he had people who believed him. That was enough. After all, he was a Gryffindor. When Ciaran woke that morning, thick snow was falling outside. It had started sometime after midnight and had been coming down for hours. It was the weekend, so apart from mealtimes, he wasn't required to escort the students. He had a rare, lazy morning to himself after several days of long patrols. He was enjoying the quiet when a piercing scream echoed through Hogwarts. "Ah!" A sharp, piercing scream shattered the quiet of Hogwarts morning. Ciaran sat bolt upright. Footsteps thundered in the corridor outside his office, joined by hushed, frightened voices. Another attack? How could it come so fast? His heart jumped. He dressed in a hurry, splashed water on his face, snatched his wand, and ran out. The fourth floor was thick with students, but the scene of the attack was on the third. He forced his way through the crowd. Being a professor made students part like water to let him pass, and finally reached the third-floor corridor. A ghost hung rigidly in midair. Beneath him lay 3 motionless students, eyes vacant and fixed on nothing. Ciaran stared. 4 victims. He counted them in disbelief. Nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost, Hermione Granger, Justin Finch Fletchley, a Hufflepuff, and Penelope Clearwater, Ravenclaw prefect. 4 this time? The heir of Slytherin must be getting bolder, someone whispered. It's Harry Potter. He found them. He's the culprit, another student spat. The young wizards and witches whispered and pointed. Professor McGonagall arrived seconds later, knitting her brows. Clear a path. Make room for the hospital, she called sharply. The students opened up. Several professors hurried Hermione, Penelope, and Justin toward the hospital. They were at a loss with nearly headless Nick. How do you carry a ghost? McGonagall flicked her wand, conjured a large fan, and ordered a student to fan Nick, while others rushed the living victims to Madame Pomfrey. Then McGonagall turned and fixed Harry Potter with a searching look. Potter, she said, you were the first to find them. Tell us everything you know. Harry's hands trembled. Professor, I swear I didn't. I don't know who did it. I know it was the basilisk, but I don't know who the heir of Slytherin is. Ciaran cut straight to the heart of it. Harry, why were you here? Did you see anything when you arrived? Harry looked even more shaken. I heard a voice. Because I'm Parseltongue, I could understand. I wanted to see what was wrong. I ran into Hermione and the others, but they were already petrified when I found them. I would never hurt Hermione. Snape's lips curled in a cold sneer. A clever trick, he said. Petrify Miss Granger, and naturally suspicion falls away. Harry glared back. The two of them stared each other down for a moment before Snape looked away. Professor Sprout said quietly, voice tight with something between fear and disbelief. If a ghost can be petrified, then nothing is safe, even those who died once. Nearly headless Nick hanging there, frozen as though caught between worlds, sent chills through everyone. The basilisk's power had always been lethal to those who looked directly into its eyes. Petrification was a mercy compared to death, but a ghost being petrified? It broadened the scope of terror in the room. If a ghost could be stricken, what did that mean for anyone who might meet the creature's gaze? Professor, I really didn't, Harry kept protesting. Ciaran gave him a steady nod. All right, Harry, I believe you. Relief washed over the boy's face like water over parched earth. For the first time since discovering the victims, someone took him at his word. Snape's expression, meanwhile, remained unreadable. We should clear the castle, Ciaran said to the gathered staff. Send students back to their common rooms. And Harry, you should come with me to see the headmaster. If the basilisk returns, it's too dangerous to leave students in the corridors. Agreement came quickly. Professors shepherded their houses away. Their footsteps and low murmurs receded down the staircases. Harry stayed by Ciaran's side, pale and restless. Ciaran glanced toward the cluster of Gryffindors. He saw several heads of red hair, Ron, maybe a few others, but one small head was missing. A cold premonition clenched his gut. Harry, have you seen Ginny Weasley? Ciaran asked. Harry froze. He had been distracted and terrified, and suddenly the question hit him like a blow. I saw Ginny in the common room earlier, he said slowly, but I haven't seen her since. Missing? Ciaran's face tightened. Without another word, he took Harry's arm and started for the headmaster's office. Harry had never seen Ciaran so grave. He thought of Hermione and the others who had been petrified, but Ciaran's expression carried a different kind of dread. Could Ginny have been taken too? Could Ginny? Harry began. We'll speak in Dumbledore's office. Ciaran cut him off. His thoughts were already racing. If a fragment of Voldemort's soul had sensed a way to act through Ginny, it might have been the trigger this morning, the diary manipulating her to open the Chamber of Secrets. That could explain the sudden release of the basilisk and the wave of petrifications. If Ginny had been used as the conduit, she was likely in grave danger now. Ciaran felt the urgency like ice in his veins. He would have to get to Dumbledore and then to the Chamber of Secrets, quickly. He had no confidence that he could defeat a basilisk by sightless means. To fight it with his eyes shut, relying on sound and touch, would be like fighting with his hands tied. He needed Dumbledore's counsel and the help of the headmaster's phoenix if there was any hope of saving the girl. There had to be time. He only hoped there still was.